The high rainfall in northern Australia creates impressive river systems. In areas where the countryside flattens out, swampy wetlands form and make irresistible habitat for copious quantities of various critters. As the land becomes parched towards the end of the dry season, the last remaining waterholes become heavily populated refuges. Bustling crowds of plumed whistling ducks rest during the day under shady trees along the edges of the billabong. In their company are Raja shell duck and magpie geese. Brolgas forage along the banks, towering over the purple swamp hens as they scurry about their business. Egrets stalk fish in the shallows using their long necks to make quick strikes at their targets. The little pied cormorant proves quite the fisherman tackling this hefty mullet. Oops, he might have lost it. Oh, no, he's got it back, and he swallows it whole. Amongst the lilies are Australian coots and the diminutive pygmy geese. A mated pair of hardy heads are on a mission, conducting their travels under the watchful eye of a juvenile night heron. This comb-crested jacana has specially elongated toes that enable it to walk across any floating vegetation as it searches for small creatures and insects hiding in the swampy weeds.
But life is not restricted to what's above the water's surface. Northern Australia's rivers and wetlands are teeming with aquatic denizens. The powerful and aggressive sooty grunter is a tough customer who'll give a dogged fight when hooked on light tackle. Schools of bony brims sneak about in the creeks, where one can also find the ox-eyed herring, a handsome fish and spirited fighter. The black catfish patrol the sandy floor, and turtles skulk about in amongst the caves and tree roots. These locations are also a good spot to find tasty cherubim. Aptly named archerfish lurk just below the water's surface, bringing down insects from leafy perches by firing jets of water. Rainbow fish and hardyheads cluster about the edges, enjoying the protection of the weeds and rocks. Yet a small and well-camouflaged enemy can also be found here, the formidable Mouth Almighty. And a true prize of our northern waters is an ambush predator fond of snags and other forms of good cover. A huge part in being an awesome fisherman is not just catching fish, but looking like you've spent a shitload of money on your attire. Having the right outfit can fool folk into thinking you know what you're doing. So a pair of Crocs, pyjama pants, and a Chesty Bonds blue singlet is right on the money. Still in my pyjamas and just thought I'd go for a little fish and dragged a big barramundi out of the creek.
I'm going to call it at 63 centimeters, maybe 64.
A little later on, further down the creek. So yeah, a sooty grunter, very common fish in the top end of Australia, through the Kimberleys, and they're aggressive, they're hard fighting, and average eating. Let them go to grow a little bigger. There's an uncountable amount of attractive freshwater courses weaving their way across the top of the country. And considering the rather warm conditions, many of these watercourses demand the weary traveller to take a refreshing dip. And some of them even have a convenient Tarzan rope hanging from a likely branch, such as this one here. The fact that I just hauled a 63 centimetre barramundi out of this little creek indicates to me that the person who put that rope up there in that tree has rocks in their head. Barramundi have a semi-complex freshwater saltwater existence. As a general rule, wherever you can find barramundi, you can also find saltwater crocodiles. These very large, dangerous reptiles have a misleading name. They do have a resistance to saltwater. They do prefer estuarine environments, but they can be found many miles inland, living their long lives happily in very fresh water.
It appears it's not just Mr. Foreman catching fish today. A Mertens water monitor gobbles down its lunch before flopping down on a rock to digest its hapless victim. Meanwhile, under a rock, someone is faced with the problem of where to even start. As we venture south towards the junction of the Gibb River Road, we encounter more dry season fires.
Pun intended. Fire is a hotly debated issue in Australia, so here's the basics. For tens of thousands of years, native Australians across the continent use fire strategically for many different reasons. Nowadays, the main purpose for these burn-offs is to reduce the fuel load that accumulates over time. The theory being, numerous low-intensity fires are much better for the environment and safer for humans than a high-intensity fire that devastates everything in its path. Here in the sparsely populated north, these fires are lit and left to burn. But things are a little more problematic in the south, with bigger trees, thicker forests, and a much higher human population. There, the prospect of any fire is met with fierce resistance. Unfortunately, they are inevitable, and whether by natural or human interference, the fires always come. Back in the north, these plants will likely survive this low-intensity fire, and within days there can be rapid regrowth following these relatively cool blazes. Predatory black kites love the fires. Either soaring on the wing or perched at good vantage points, they await the flames to drive out grasshoppers, lizards, and furry creatures that might make a tasty meal for a hungry bird.
We find ourselves back on the Gibb River Road, heading east with a definite increase in traffic. One of the most impressive views along this section is where the Pentacost River winds its way across the land, backed by the majestic Coburn Range.
This is the iconic river crossing of the Kimberley. You'll see in every four-wheel drive magazine and show the Pentacost River below the Coburn Ranges.
Now, of course, everybody makes this stop. Not far from the Pentacost crossing, we set up camp for the night, planning to make our way to El Questro station on the morrow. It's time to introduce some of the locals. These attractive birds are the red-winged parrots. The males have a more prominent red patch than the females. These parrots are a regular sighting in the north, and this particular group is feeding on the familiar yellow kapok bush. Another resident to watch out for is the northern rosella, though it's surprisingly hard to see at times. This is definitely not the case in regards to the red-tailed black cockatoo. Raucous and conspicuous, the males have a bulky black crest with unbarred scarlet panels in its tail. Females, on the other hand, are speckled with white dots and possess barred orange paneled tails. It's always a pleasure to see the blue-winged kookaburra. The males have the blue rumps, while the females have the brown ones. The willy wagtails are the Jack Russell Terriers of the bird world. They're small, bold, and fearless. Wood swallows, white-bellied cuckoo shrikes, and pink and gray galahs are always a delight out in the Aussie bush. Around camp are lots of little finches, such as these crimson varieties. We get some in-close visits from a rascally band of masked finches and longtails, eating some of our eggshells for much-needed calcium, helpful in part for making their own eggs. A little more timid and hiding away are the beautiful starfinches. These little birds need to take great caution as lurking in close proximity is a collared sparrowhawk, a masterful ambusher of little birds.
The following morning begins our travels to El Questro station, a not-so-successful pastoral lease that has changed hands many times since first being taken up in 1903. Set in outstandingly rugged and beautiful country, with several major river systems running through its boundaries, tourism is where this property has flourished. El Questro is a professionally run outfit taking full advantage of the attractions the property has to offer. Boat trips run through the stunning Chamberlain River, and there are plentiful hikes through lush gorges with permanently flowing water. Accommodation varies from campsites to secluded 5-star bungalows perched precariously over a crocodile-infested river. Close to what they call the township, we again negotiate the Pentacost. Naturally, this is a seasonal destination, as this water crossing would be an interesting exercise in the wet season. As you might expect, this riverside campsite is a popular place. At the headquarters is where it all happens. Bookings, permits, limited supplies, booze, and nightly entertainment around the campfire.
We're keen to start exploration immediately and make our way out along the dirt tracks with even more watery crossings to the El Questro Gorge. This spring-fed creek flows through a deep cleft in the rock and shelters a healthy grove of Livistonia palms. A trail follows the stream deeper into mountains, past an Aboriginal rock painting of an upside-down human figure. We pass many little pools and mini cascades inhabited by the usual suspects, as well as this strange-looking little goby. As we progress deeper into the gorge, the going becomes a little more challenging, with some climbs on smooth rocks where a slip could prove quite uncomfortable. Eventually, the trail comes to an end in a shadowy little grotto with a very chilly waterfall.
Not too far out of the way is the road to Zebedee Hot Springs that is only open for public use in the mornings and gets very full. Warmish water oozes out of the rocks and trickles through some shallow pools full of people, locked together like canned sardines. As the sign indicates, if the car park is even half full, then the springs are already crowded. It's time to give this Land Rover of ours a bit more of a workout. We descend to a rather rocky river crossing, and our best guess is that it must be at the end of the Chamberlain River, just before it converges with the Pentacost. It's a slow, rough old ride, and the Interceptor gets a good shaking on the roof. Once across, we now begin the steep ascent to a viewpoint called Branco's Lookout. This is a great drive, steep and windy, and a bit tricky when you encounter other vehicles. Then eventually, when the summit is reached, there's a magnificent panorama to behold. The mountains in the distance are the impressive Coburn Range that we encountered back on the main road. This river looks very fishy. Our Questro station stretches east to the end of the Gibb, where it joins the Great Northern Highway. A spectacular end to our stay at this remarkable place.
Silver-crowned friarbirds squawk away in the grevilleas as we make our way into the last attraction along the road. Fossilized ripples in the stone betray the origins of the rock as sediments laid down in what was most likely a shallow sea, now broken off in huge chunks and laying as they fell. Emma Gorge is a large, chilly body of water at the base of a permanent waterfall in surroundings that are cool and lush. Then, after an easy run on a paved road, we finally complete this iconic track through the heart of the Kimberley. We've just completed the Gibb River Road, in addition to our side trips up to Mitchell Falls and Columbaroo. So now it's time to inspect the landy. Lucky us, we got to travel these roads when they were extremely corrugated. So our approach to these dreadful corrugations was slow and steady. So we took it at about 60 kilometers over the good parts and closer to 20 on the really bad stuff. We also made sure that our tire pressures were really low, so 18 on the front and 25 psi on the back. Considering the number of sharp rocks we encountered, this could be considered foolish. But, as you'll see, after 1,000 kilometers, over 1,000 kilometers of pretty rough and rugged driving, we've only had a few little scuff-ups and maybe a few scratches on the sidewall. Otherwise, they seem to be in pretty good order, and the landy herself is pretty shipshape. In summary, If you've got the time and an extreme amount of patience, slow and steady seems to be the best approach. It's the best way to minimize damage to your vehicle, to lessen the impact on the road conditions, as well as ensures the safety of not just yourself, but other drivers.
40 or so kilometres north is the town of Wyndham, where we have the opportunity to stock up on supplies. A fine welcome to the Kimberley's oldest town is a ferocious looking crocodile that is probably modelled to scale. For many years, the Wyndham Meatworks were the town's economic lifeline, and tales are told of dinosaur-like monstrosities that lurked about in the murky depths of the rivers. These rivers are big enough to facilitate a port that exports cattle and zinc. From atop the bastion in the Erskine Range is where one can see 5 major river systems emerge into the Gulf, and also Australia's version of the Nazca Lines, depicted on the clay flats near the port.
In the next and what will be the final episode of the Western Walkabout series, we shall explore the Kimberley's eastern gateway town of Kununurra, the truly horrible Ord River, and the mysterious Bungle Bungles. Be sure to join us. Bye for now.